Hello, everyone. My name is Travis Carlson. I'm the writer and director of Mother's Day, which is this film. We're going to do an audio commentary here, which is super special for me because audio commentaries, I feel like, were the biggest way that I learned filmmaking. Besides doing it yourself, there was this magic little window from, I don't know, maybe 2003 to almost today. It's starting to fall apart now, like a little 20-year span where audio commentaries existed and gave a wealth of information where you could just sit at home and be next to some of the best creators in their industry. I'm not sure if other industries even had the equivalent of that, like a industrial engineer or, I don't know, athlete, teachers, where you could just sit with them for 2 hours and watch their stuff and get insight. So I feel like I need to pay it forward. A lot of my education happened right there in that house, right to the left. We'll get into that and many more things throughout this film. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I'm going to jump right into this first shot, which is one of the most complicated. It's definitely the most complicated shot we've ever tried and most spectacular. As you can see, so we open on Jordan, which is Michael Charles Wagner, and right there is the last time we're going to see Mike. What's happening behind the camera right now is he's handing me the helmet. I'm wearing the exact same costume, and I'm quickly trying to put it on as fast as I can and buckle it. And by the time we look back, this is called the old Texas switch, which I first heard about on an audio commentary for Blue Valentine, or Place Beyond the Pines. Both of those films are instrumental in the influence they have over this film and what I feel like great filmmaking can be. So here we go. That was me and is me. The camera just took off from the hand of our director of photography and is obviously flying. So from the time we opened until now and for the next several minutes, we've been watching a GoPro on a small FPV drone, which is about the size of a tennis shoe. They're made for racing more than they are for filmmaking, but we're starting to adapt it here as we fly and soar over the town of Gary, which is the actual house that I grew up in. And I've driven this road thousands, tens of thousands of times on a motorcycle. And this neighbor right here on the right, you might see a guy. He's super, super pissed at us because this motorcycle has really loud exhaust, and we had practiced the day before and today quite a bit. And so he was getting annoyed that we were going up and down the road. But so much that we could talk about here. And one of the most interesting things before we leave it is for this shot to happen, for this drone to work, there's a huge amount of stuff happening right behind the camera. Beyond the fact that I'm driving and doing some high-speed driving and cornering and stuff, when I take off there, I get up to about 90 miles an hour and brake really hard for the first corner. We have a kid on a dirt bike here, sort of. Obviously, storytelling-wise, we're setting up the world, but for the drone operator to have signal with this drone, he has to be within line of sight of it. He's wearing... So, real quick, if you look at the road near the bottom of your screen now, keep an eye for some distortion. Right there by the intersection, you see a quick glimpse of it. That's us actually masking out the follow car, which is driven by Mark Braun, one of our producers and actors, who's speeding as fast as we are to make sure that the drone operator is always within sight. I mean, it's 1.5 miles. And so right here, boom, we did our first invisible cut of the movie. And look for a little bit of distortion in Mike right there. That is the drone being caught in the palm of Aaron Rizzo, the director of photography's hands. So now he's walking with it like a helicopter with its rotors off, and that's how he'll continue. And there is the real Mark Braun in real life. Now he's in costume and using a prop vehicle. So he wasn't just being a stuntman. We did the hidden cut in order to get Mike Wagner back on the motorcycle in a degree in which he could handle the ask, which is basically just pull the bike into a parking spot. And the drone operator for the end of this shot could just stand off camera. He didn't need to be driven around for basically replicating the exact same move that we had done through the trees there in order to, as closely as possible, have the same shot so that we could blend them together in the computer and editing softwares later. Which brings us to this. Now, we attempted for as close as possible. When you spend about a week looking at that footage, trying to make two very not similar shots match up, you realize just how far away it is. Everything from the light being vastly different to cars being parked in different places. Not to mention that the camera is moving at a different speed and in different positions. I'm pretty happy with the final result, honestly. I think it's pretty smooth, and I put the title over it to just give us a little extra distraction from the eye, sleight of hand, as they would say, as a magician would say, which is all part of it. So we're walking into Heritage Village and seeing some of the host of characters around a normal day in Jordan's life, including Mrs. Campbell here. Actually, this is all based on real life, so this is based on when I was working at Heritage Village. This is obviously fiction here, that she's just looking at a idyllic picture of a puzzle of a house. So the symbology can mean whatever you want it to mean, but I did try to have a few touchstones where we're showing different examples of houses. You can see two transitions there. When you're looking for them, they're pretty obvious. I think they're obvious all the time, but we transitioned between a time lapse. And now that we've come out of it, we've actually switched cameras to a medium grade camera that's not a GoPro. You can see there's depth of field and a little bit different lens on it. We will end up doing one more camera change. This camera being more suited to the next shot, obviously, which we'll get into. We had these touchstones of houses. So we open on a shot of the house that Jordan is calling home and the house that Wendy is considering in her memory when she's referring to her house. And then this house that is a puzzle. Puzzles are complicated. Puzzles don't always fit, even if they look nice. Take it for what it will. Also take it at face value, which is that nursing homes frame puzzles, and that's just a quaint, beautiful little thing about our culture. And then we're also going to have a good look at Wendy's house in the town of Gary, which used to be Jordan's grandpa. So we're leaving Heritage Village, and before we get too far away, I do want to mention that this scene is a little longer than I would want it to be. I had to add dialogue. I would have loved for this, and the plan was for this to be closer to 30 seconds going in and then 30 seconds coming out, where it ends up being closer to like 2 minutes for each. And that's because we filmed this during the pandemic, 2020, when the world was extremely locked down. Nowhere more so than nursing homes. A nursing home would be the last thing you would choose to shoot in. This is when no vaccine existed. There was still a lot of panic and fear in people. Like literally, the panic buying was still wrapping up its cycle. But yeah, elderly people, as they still are now in 2022, when I'm recording this, were the most vulnerable. But Heritage Village worked with us. Right behind Jordan's head there is a breezeway that connects to wings of the nursing home. So we never actually entered the nursing home, which would have been unsafe and potentially illegal. I got to jump now. We just handed the camera off to Cole Bilecki, who's in a in the sunroof of a Camry. And obviously we're following him. So as things back up there, we sort of pause for a moment. And that's when the handoff is happening. And Aaron Rizzo, the director of photography, jumps into his own car and is right behind us. I'm actually with him in that. I don't remember which car I actually ended up getting in. We all pull out. As you can see, the traffic is slowed down. It was very difficult to get all of our people to pull out in a fast enough approach as we establish the world and geography of this small town of Gary. We've got Country Fair on the left and Country Fair on the right, Lee Becker here on the left, being sort of a street hooligan. It's going to get referenced later. The fire hall, blinky light. You can see the white truck at Country Fair there is the electrician who's gone from work to get filled up. And then the foreman, Greg Natali, is going to be right here in his truck, Quick Wave. So he lives a couple doors down. We're establishing this town, the scale of it and the scope that is reality of Heritage Village being the place where most of the people in town worked. And so we've arrived at Wendy's house. What's happening behind the scenes is Aaron, who I told you sped ahead of us through a back way, has gotten out of his car, grabs the camera from Cole. You can see it tilts down there, and he just tilts it up. If you could hear what he's saying, he's cursing pretty seriously right there, feeling like he might have ruined a shot, which we had to do this many times. And this was Mike's basically second day driving a bike on the road. So starting to get under his skin, the pressure. He plays it really cool. That's Aaron's car parked on the shoulder. And we're going to do our cutaway, invisible cut there. So you can see Aaron's car is now gone because we have switched to a different day now and a different camera. So this is now the camera and the setup that we'll use for the rest of the movie as we are establishing character of Wendy. Most people don't notice a couple minutes ago when Mike is putting his envelope in his motorcycle, he has a Bernie sticker hidden inside of his saddlebag. Again, if you're watching this in the distant future, you might not have been taught just how sort of like diabolically opposite, Sanders and Trump were. I mean, Trump became famous for being polarizing, hugely popular in rural settings, hugely unpopular in urban settings for the most part, obviously. And as most of you probably do know, like this was a time of great political division. And for a lot of families, the political viewpoints would be a huge difficulty in their relationship. And I almost wanted to just tease that that's one of the many things that these two are going to deal with, as we just did one more hidden cut in that last whip pan. So the mess, you can see the Easter bunnies behind. One of our choices or reminders or things I remember from real life was how messes linger and stick behind. But let's talk about the dog. This scene, I mean, there's no replacing a dog that is showing his teeth trying to bark at you and the instinctual fear that creates. The dog was a great barker, but not all the time. Because the dog was in a new environment, basically what he would consider as outside of his den, and he was with a woman he didn't really recognize, being the incredible Lisa Ludwig. He wasn't quite as protective as he would be of his own owner in his own house. So what's happening, this is all a continuous shot from the time I told you we switched to this take. So me as Travis is, in real life, as you would say, is on the ground right behind Mike's feet. In fact, and I'm jumping in and out and like peeking my head out from behind the the little island. And anytime she cools off a little, I peek my head back out really quick and hide it again, so she feels like there's a reason to be stimulated. And to get this final move, I knew we had most of the scene, so I just army crawled across the floor as quickly as I could, hitting Mike to make sure that she had enough energy to finish the shot. We'd had so much trouble, and this was our last chance because a huge storm was about to come in, so we weren't going to be able to keep running the whole scene. Okay. And this is one of my favorite moments of the movie, cutting from the energy level being at a 10 down to a 1. And that like just outside of the house is just a normal, relatively quiet day, relatively normal, and not so far different from the kind of idyllic scenery we tried to set up at the beginning of like, it's a small town in the summer, things are good. And it's all there, including a tandem bicycle upside down behind Mike in that shot, which our neighbor Ross, well, he's in the movie, he's the neighbor Ross Mills. It's John Kehoe. He ends up buying that bike and takes it home from the shared driveway neighbor here. Okay, so Mike is going to open up the garage, and I'm going to point your attention here to the left of the garage. You'll see a little bit of a glow. That is our monitor watching the door open, and you can see my head. And I just put my hands on Sherry and on Luke, the two others who are in there, and say don't move, just so that our shadows don't draw too much attention to ourselves. And so, well, yeah, I'll for now, I guess I'll leave it at that's our staging area for multiple reasons, our little video village. Yeah, so you'll notice, if you're not looking at the picture, the top right of frame is a broken Christmas ornament of a house that has been somehow broken in the last year. And the secondary setting we were trying to set up is that she took the Christmas stuff back into the garage, clearly using her car that is no longer used as a workbench, and just sort of got lost in memories of sort of the perfect ideal. You see a picture of the puppy. This is obviously Jordan as a kid. That's an actual picture of myself and my grandpa in the same driveway. That's what the implication there is. There's a history, but it's also buried under some sicknesses and cat litter. And just as it is when someone is sick, physically or mentally, it can really get heavy, the stuff and the mess, and that can almost be just as difficult. So that's as much a part of this and important to show. Him dragging the chairs and then bouncing. I mean, we're really kind of giving some heroic value to some of the props that we're going to be looking at for the next hour. Maybe our final bit of world building and town building is done amazingly here by Jerry. I love him as an actor. I've seen him in several plays in Buffalo, and he was happy to come down and do this very small role, and then give us a ton of context in terms of like how the town views this family, views its history, views that whatever, on a meta level or an esoteric level, that it was obviously better in the past and it's becoming forgotten or clouded up. That white dog in the background, I'm so glad she made it in, was a stray that we found this day as we were filming, or the day before, around set. And the neighbor decided to give him a snowball some love. So I'm glad you made it. We did one cut there as Jordan walked away from Arch. It's a very convincing cut, I believe. Harder to see. And that will be the last of the invisible cuts for a while. In fact, we're kicking off, I checked before I started rolling, a 57-minute uninterrupted take. And so prior to this, we've had some uninterrupted, like 5-minute takes, potentially, or 1-minute takes. Obviously, to create this impression of real-time continuity of action in a way that we're not just going to jump through time and skip ahead as a plot device, like most movies would do. The one exception, of course, being the time lapse that Mrs. Campbell watches as a day passes. So, structure-wise, there was a lot of thought early on as to why.
They're too strong.
Well, not why, but should we start with Jordan leaving and going to work and talking and chewing the fat with his friends and sort of establishing coworkers and what they talk about? You could totally start the movie with Jordan pulling in the driveway at his mom's house and the dogs go ballistic, and that's sort of your cold open. And there is valid points to be made on both sides, but I always came back to like two different things, which is one, that the movie is going to take place entirely, basically at this point, between these two people in a two-hander play in two chairs with no real blocking. So very small, very contained, and to some extent, like, I felt like we needed to give the audience a treat, give them dessert before the meat and potatoes of the next hour and a half. So opening on something as big and spectacular as we could handle at our budget level and crew level and, you know, my abilities as a new filmmaker. I mean, I wish I would have prefaced this earlier when I was talking about the great audio commentaries that have come before me, but I certainly do not know enough about filmmaking and always want to learn more. So I'm going to share what I know, but I don't want it to come across as if I've already got it figured out and this is me educating you. I'm happy to share my notes. But there is something to say of, especially when you watch a film that's in the independent realm or a student film, you kind of have your radar up of like, am I in good hands? I think you do that on professional films too. You're looking for indicators of like, can I trust this experience and let it go, or do I need to like keep a critical eye out and sort of just have my radar up that this is sort of untrue in some way. And so I think trying to give ourselves a little bit of street cred with the audience of saying like, we are able to do something a little bit bigger or broader or more traditional in terms of what you see in movies, but we're choosing to make this choice to do the rest of the movie sort of contained like this, I think is a little different than opening on this and maybe giving the impression of like, well, that's all they could come up with, or that's all they're capable of. You know, I don't know if we could ever trust them to do a real scene with logistics, and I don't know. So that's just a thought, and take it with a grain of salt. More importantly, from a storytelling point of view, this whole movie is contained with these two people talking the whole time about the context of themselves and in their place in the world and their worldviews. And if we don't establish fact, if we don't establish even just like in your bones and in your blood as an audience, you sort of have an impression that like the house on the hill does exist, the dad does exist, this is what it looks like, this is the feeling I get when I look at it. this is the view that they look at. This is the drive. Heritage Village exists, and the people he works with exist, and he does have a level of normalcy in his life that is different than his normalcy when he's with his mother. Just trying to create 7 minutes, which ends up being of these are the facts and obviously the world that they live in, and how that compares to the house she's currently living in. And we're now starting to learn, obviously, that the grandpa and the father character lived in this house, and Wendy and her current divorced husband, met and grew up in this house and in Heritage Village, and all these landmarks. And all of those things exist within a 7-minute drive. You can get to all three of them within a mile and a half. So the kind of the closeness that she talks about, and the suffocating she feels, and the knowing about people's cars in the driveway. I wanted all of that. I wanted the audience to be in on that, just like Jordan and Wendy are in on it. It's not just this abstract thing of when we say a small town or things used to be better or whatever, that the audience is all on the same page. Half the people aren't imagining a small suburban town or a small town of 20,000 people. Or a small town of 7 people. This is, Gary is what it is. Which ends up being like 1,000 people spread out over, I don't know, several square miles, but a little. We also, the last thing I might add to all that is the geography of like how far Country Fair is from the house, which ends up being a talking point. All these little things I thought were important for the audience to have in the back of their head, sort of as pictures to reference when all this dialogue and storytelling is trying to give them, conjure them into existence, sort of thing. So, all that being said, I wish we could have shaved off 4 minutes of it, as it, and it was planned to be that. But when you make certain choices, like it's going to be a continuous shot, and we're going to respect the geography, and then there's a global pandemic that doesn't let you go into a nursing home. You have to use the back door. Yeah, that can be the result. So just to change the subject a little bit here, as we change backgrounds to what they're facing. I mentioned that this was real. I think that's clear at this point. But this is the exact spot that my mom and I had this talk, which I tried to script verbatim as to how it happened. And the first time I wrote this, it was just to myself to sort of make a record to myself of what had happened, a couple years ago in this incident that, I had remembered at the time, even when I leave, like, oh my God, like I feel like I just watched a movie of that conversation. It was just so volatile and had so many plot twists, almost. It's just one of those things, but I didn't bring myself to write it down. I don't know why exactly, and I won't speculate, I guess. But yeah, it's for me to look at this stuff. I played in those trees when I was a kid that we're currently looking at. There was a pool right next door. This was all my memory of my grandpa's house and my grandma. That gets mentioned a lot, and then it transitions into my mother's house, and so why shoot it there? It feels like an obvious choice. Logistically, it makes the most sense from the point of view of like, I know I have connections with people who in the town still. There's a good reason to choose that particular house as opposed to any other particular house. So it's a little bit of leverage. But the biggest thing, I'm a huge believer of just trying to tell the truth as much as you can with everything that the people see. And that's what a lot of movies, I think, are striving for as well. But there's also a technique to kind of Hollywood it up a little and make sure everybody looks spectacular, super clean, no wrinkles, well scrubbed, well groomed. When you build a set and you over production design it, I mean, I love those movies as much as the next person. Definitely not right for this story though. But this story needed, leave your junk pile the way it is. Please don't paint the back of your garage because we're going to film there. Leave it as it is. Don't cut the grass any way different. We did have our neighbor move a giant white trailer that would have been blocking your current view. You can see the brown patch where the rain wasn't and sun wasn't getting to the grass, which created a little bit of a deeper sight line, but pretty minimal. We put the Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus right there on the left. We put that in, and as another forgotten, let's just say as a symbolic thing to muse upon as you're watching the film. There's a decent shot of it. Whether I always had strong intent, I know what it means to me, but showing different religious symbols or family symbols or home symbols sort of in the way that we set them up to mean such great things, and in reality sometimes they're tipped over, sometimes they're left out in the summertime, and those are all factors. I think there's a lot of expectation on what a family is supposed to be, what they're often depicted as, even in art and in film, sort of those Hollywood things we just talked about, compared to what they really are, which when we set out on this journey, this was just to sort of bring to light, this family dynamic that I kind of thought was unique to my experience. When I wrote this, I didn't think it was going to be indicative of anything bigger than just what me and my mom experienced on one day. And at our first table read, I was happy to hear that, the Maria and Mark Braun, and then Megan and myself, who did that first read, all found a lot of our own lives in it. Dad said it was kind of sudden. Did you get any? And also felt like kind of immediately it was a story we were going to try to tell, which we weren't even sure at that point. And that was, I think, October of 2019. So
I really haven't been anywhere except.
It just Richard Linklater has an amazing quote that I've said many times, but it's important to keep it alive. And that the more specific of a story or a character you tell, the more details you put into it, the more someone relates to it as a viewer, because their life is extremely specific and has a lot of specific details. And where you can lose a lot of audience members is when you have vague backstories and broad character traits that's not relatable, because no one is just a tech superhero, or no one is just good, or no one is just a sort of generic, whatever, archetype, or a deadbeat cop or whatever. They have very specific relationships. So that gave a lot of permission to a young, impressionable filmmaker like myself to just embrace the story as it was and not feel like I needed to stub it off and, treat it differently or in a way that wasn't true.
You can go right to the parks. Really? Yeah. I have to do something.
And so that decision making hopefully became the backbone of the entire film. Any directorial choice, any production choice, casting choices, all of it really came down to like
There's a lot to think about. Okay.
mostly how can we portray the event as close to the way it happened as
I
possible.
cannot spend another
Um,
winter in this house.
Well, Mom,
The other big reason too being like
last time.
I don't feel like I'm qualified to
Christmas, right?
have big
Yeah, no, because Dad is
commentaries or social commentaries on what is right or wrong or how mental health is supposed to be handled, if it is even a mental health situation. You know,
less than a year before the rednecks
I
tried to steal
I had a
the
lot
land
of like
and
mixed
back.
signals at the time, even the time when I wrote it, as to like what was actually going on with my mom and with myself and our history and baggage. And I certainly am not qualified to untangle all that and say like this is a story of this and this is how it should be handled. And look at this is a story that's supposed to be an allegory for teaching you how to do something right. I more so thought I was qualified to say this is how it happens, and maybe you want to fit into that, or you want to use this as a tool to evaluate others in your life or to reflect.
And seasons for your health. I mean, I don't know. To say that you want to make
And
that same mistake part again.
So that brought us to this sort of complicated, messy, warts and all, and yet I think gorgeous and rich piece of life.
But I can't stay here. No.
What more could you ask for from a film, really? Like that was a transition for me. It took me time to discover that, from being a kid thinking movies meant Batman and Indiana Jones being the best. Eventually, to me now, the most kind of transformative moments were seeing the Before Sunrise trilogy and Blue Valentine, Place Beyond the Pines,
I was here too. It was worse up on the
both saying like, you know, your lived experience can be just as thrilling, and making a point of that. It doesn't always have to be stunts. My early films were all attempts at being stunt-based, commercial appealing movies. But this being sort of the first mature film out, references more of those others that I think are some of the best. Revolutionary Road needs to be mentioned as well. In fact, I named Mrs. Campbell and the Wheeler family. They mentioned Frank and April, and little glimpses as to their backstory. Those are all tributes to that powerful. It's one of my favorite novels ever, and I like to think of this as a similar dive into domestic life in a specific time and place. The dad's character's name is Michael, which was one of the son's names in Revolutionary Road. So I wanted to sort of say maybe this exists in the same thing, where a generation before, the 50s, you saw in Revolutionary Road, and now you're seeing the 2015 version with their descendants unpacking a complicated culture and family life in their own way. And maybe they all exist sort of in the same. So I wanted to kind of just nod my hat and pay tribute to the people who came before there. And all the rest of the names are pulled from street names from Gary and Ellington and Chautauqua County. Dr. Brainerd and Damon and Ross Mills, all of them are on the map, and I think add a nice flavor of the actual place, and credit to the town that made this.
I can't work. Okay, Mr. Hansen says if they see me working,
We decided to call this a continuous shot film. A lot of people would say like a one-take film. It's not a one-take film because we do invisible cuts. We shot 4 days in a one take. We shot this backyard performance 4 times, as in, if you think of it like a play, we did 4 performances of this play, which start with Jordan walking out of his house after almost getting bit by a dog, until he gets on his motorcycle and leaves at the end of the night. So we did that 2 days in a row on a weekend, and then the next weekend we did 2 days in a row of it, and we did it all the way through. We set basically a rule that we would not stop for any reason unless someone's safety was in danger.
No, that's great.
So we didn't. So rain or shine, we would have kept going. If that stray dog would have come over and bothered us. Any happy accident, we almost were hoping for, I don't even want to say secretly, openly hoping for happy accidents. And you'll see several, including the ambulance driving by at the perfect time. Impacts of weather, lighting. That's the other side of when you shoot it in the actual location, whatever that actually location does, you win. They're all contributing, which I really like. Instead of just a backdrop, like on a playset, it's a living existence of a real place that we're trying to capture. So, hopefully I can always film on location. It seems like that's all I can talk about. So we did these 4 days. Right now you're watching day 2. When I told you we jumped in, but prior to that, like when he walks out from the dog bite, looks at the pictures and talks to Art, that was day 4. And then we wiggled into day 2. This is our first break into zoning out or disassociation, however you want to interpret that. We all zone out. Some of us disassociate. I don't know which of the two this is for Wendy right now. But also for the audience, it's a break from the nonstop dialogue. As you can see, there's a mother and a only child playing together at an age that probably could imply the two of them in a similar spot, and Gary doing the same thing. Dad not there, but also the fallen Mary and Jesus and Joseph in the foreground. So it's a break, but it's also a surprise in that when the audience sort of settles into what seems like, oh my God, are we really just going to watch these two until it's over, sit in this chair and talk? Do I really want to watch basically an interview for 2 hours? You might have a certain hopelessness that that's it. Like it's never going to get better or more interesting. You're sort of stuck with what it is. So from a directorial point of view, trying to have a few surprises still for the audience was important, and to dole them out slowly so that you still felt like, well, hey, maybe I don't have it all. There's still a little bit of mystery as to not only where the story content's going to go, but just sort of like how it's delivered. I'm going to stay in that vein for a second because we always knew it was going to be a slow burn, and that you're tempted to want to do shots like this all the time, as close up or a medium close up, because you get the most information from the person's face. And we did camera tests of this whole thing almost as one of the first things we did as a team to sort of start vetting things out. And we realized if you do the shots you're tempted to do first, then by the time you're 20 minutes into a 2-hour movie, you feel like you've done the best, and that shot is now kind of bored. So we tried to really strategize as to like what are our better shots, our most exciting shots, or just what are the actual various, what's the range of shots we have, is be a better way to put it, not best or worst, and to spend them strategically. This part might be more important, and it is more important than some of the other things that they're talking about. So being a little closer or being closer to Wendy matters. And whether you know it or not, we're 45 minutes into the movie already, and it's one of the earlier times when we're getting this close to her and seeing some of the more details. So we've sort of established Wendy as a wide shot, and even Jordan. So as far as small costume changes and stuff, that impacted it. We did stuff with Jordan's hair being up or down, just so it didn't feel like you were getting the same shot every time you checked in, or every time there's a different scene. There's as much variety as we can offer within the limitations of reality. Those decisions came slow and with a lot of process. So I mentioned doing the full take all the way through. In the scope of the film, we did a rehearsal with myself and Aaron and the core Pan American Film Division team, Mark Davies and Sherry Light and Megan, both Mark and Maria Braun. Cole Blecki was a huge part of that as well. For some of them, that was the first time they were even experiencing the film. We tested this idea of like, can two people talking in chairs with this script be compelling, or more compelling even, with a single shot or sort of traditional coverage. And
Mr. Hansen said that I'm not supposed to
the answer
travel,
was yes, obviously. And then even more than trying to like get the world record for longest shot or anything, that was never our interest. In like, how much of a one shot can it be? More of the continuous shot realm of what we knew we wanted was continuity of performance for the actors, for one, so that they feel the impact of fatigue and time and their energy between the two of them will sort of ebb and flow, but it's always together and it's being reacted to. And there you can see the father figure sort of coming home from his day and the family in the background, and creating what looks like from the outside a nice little moment in a three-person family, which again is sort of a bar that these guys hold themselves to.
Yeah, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found him.
Here's another, just to say it, like, this would be the time of the movie where you're getting a good look at Jordan, and I feel like the audience is probably, as much as they're listening to Wendy, what she's saying isn't super important, so we wanted to give them time to be close to Jordan, to really examine Jordan, notice that he's not interested in what she's saying, and not feel like, oh, I really need to know all the ins and outs. But notice the pain on his hands, and notice the swing of his necklace, and just what his face looks like, and all the details that are visible. And then hopefully we draw it back in. So we were talking about the process our team took to get there. So Maria and I were sitting in as the performers. Maria did a great job. I was there too, and so yeah, we proved the continuous take made sense. And the first time we worked with, when we finally had cast Lisa and Mike, we did one table read meeting at their house, and then we did a baptism by fire rehearsal on set. We brought everyone down to this location, about an hour and a half from where we were stationed in Buffalo. Most of us live. And we put everybody here, and we gave it a good faith shot, and we didn't cut. And I did that for the immense educational value of doing tests gives you evidence of what works, what doesn't work. The more you can start to find your sticking points, the earlier, the better. Because I knew at that point we were about a month away from this being reality, and it has to basically be perfect. It has to be as good as it can be. It also helps, in my opinion, set the tone to the entire crew and the actors. Like, what their role is, and that this is really going to happen, especially on a smaller independent film when a lot of people are used to things not always panning out or not being at a professional level, or maybe it's too professional, who knows. But let's just give everybody that literally that baptism by fire, that first wash of like, this is what it's going to feel like. Make mental notes as like, it's almost like getting tackled by an NFL linebacker on day one of tryouts, just to say that's what it's going to feel like here. So wherever you feel it hurts, start to get pads put on wherever those places are, and let's work as a team here to make sure that in 1 month when we get back here, look at that tree, just so beautiful back there. That's one of the things that Aaron brought to the table early on. I don't know if it's because of this, but out of these tests, let's shoot it from golden hour into blue hour into nighttime. The real conversation did take place sort of during that time. It was after work, but it was a summer day, so after work would have been just, a bright 5 o'clock to 7:30. But from a cinematic point of view, that was an easy, obvious improvement to the experience of the audience, and it didn't change. And I think spiritually it actually tells the story much better, and it allows not to mention how much it impacts the scenery and the dynamicness of what we watch, so that you do have these new experiences all the time, because the light's always changing a lot. And it creates some of these visual setups. When you shoot in 360 degrees, sometimes you forget that your hands are tied in a lot of ways as far as how you're going to make sure things look cinematic or appropriate, or soft light, color ratios. So that, and that's a lot of what was being solved in those tests. So I was doing them with Aaron and the whole team once in a while, and then every day I was rehearsing with the actors. We just did that at Lisa's house around a table. We would generally read kind of the whole thing, or go through bits of it and just chip away. Memorizing being hugely important for them to do on their own time as well. And then when we were together, we were chipping away at the story, at the performance, obviously. And probably mid to the final 2 weeks of rehearsals, I brought a camera, and we would start to be in the positions that we needed to be in, and I would be moving around, filming them and getting close to them and being away from them, and helping continue to set that expectation for them of how it's going to feel with a crew and a camera in their face. And I don't think that was a problem for them, but sort of being sensitive to how to work with the camera best. But a lot of it was for me to decide when to be close, when to be behind them, when did it matter, when to be really. You have more tools at your disposal than you think, than you think on the face of it. You have all the same editing tools that I would normally be doing in the editing room. We are just making those decisions in rehearsals. This is actually a pretty good example. We're choosing when to cut to who. And not only that, how much pace and energy do we want to get to them with? And you're limited to, you're not going to cut from close-ups to a wide shot back to a close-up, because the cameraman would have to physically walk. So at best, it's a close-up that walks into a wide, that walks back into a close-up.
and it should bring in
But you can
1,000
see at times, we do settle into traditional, just it's a 2-shot, and at times it'll be just a roller coaster of energy, and I love the contrast and that we can build that in. But all those decisions just had to be kind of made in the rehearsal stage. So that's what we did. And as we're filming, so Aaron Rizzo has got his 30 to 50 pound camera, maybe closer to 50. It sure feels like 300 by the time it's been 2 hours of him trying to hold it steady and specific. It's no one envies that position, but I respect him for doing it. And then Ben Jura is out there doing audio. And those are the only 2 people out there besides the actors and the ensemble behind our lead actors. You're getting a lot of looks there at John Kehoe, who devout fans and maybe others who haven't seen it will want to watch him in Naked Dad, which was his most memorable role to date, a short film we did. But here he was happy to come back and do an important but distant role of creating context and creating B-plots that do exist around us and give us something to look at. So those are the only 2 out there, and we see 360 degrees around them. So there are no hidden lights, really. I mean, we end up using only like 2 lights officially, which you'll see later when it gets to be darker. That might be oversimplifying it a little, but so Aaron, just from a technical point of view, has got 2 pairs of headphones in. One ear is listening to the world around him. I think maybe it's a feed from Ben, but I think it is a feed from Ben, so that even when he's far away, he can hear their cues. And then the other one is open phone call that's just always going between him and myself. And I mentioned to you before that we are hiding inside of the corner of the garage, in the corner closest to our 2 characters right now. And so that's sending a video signal to me and to Luke Hagg, who is first AC, and so in this case he's pulling focus remotely, doing a smashingly good job, I might add. And so I don't think Luke has headphones on at all. He's just listening to me and the actors. And then we have Sherry, who is being the assistant director. And I also like to call her the stage manager of this, because it's more like a play than it is a film in this moment, I believe. And so this is probably the best example. She's trying to give cues to the background and is giving cues to the background. This was one of the most important and difficult things to time out, because it had to be down to the line of when he was going to cut off Lisa and Mike. And hopefully I can pause that train of thought. So Mike is just looking back because a lawnmower has just started over his shoulder, a close one. You can't hear it because we had to ADR all these lines. But we had committed to the long play with John Kehoe riding the lawnmower for the entire first part of the movie, so that you had this drone of noise. And then when we finally got to an important moment, that drone that you just like started tuning out goes away, and it's extra quiet because you have a roommate now, like the floor dropped out. We wanted that effect. And that's one of the biggest reasons we committed to him putzing around on a lawnmower the whole time. And so you can imagine how funny it is to us when he turns it off and we get that effect for like 10 seconds, and then another lawnmower turns on and drives even closer to us. That's just a neighbor who decided now's a good time to try to top off my lawn, not knowing, from several houses over, but well within earshot. And someone sprints over, I think Maria probably, if I remember correct, to ask him to stop, and does so successfully. And then a pack of motorcycle, like Harley guys, drive by and just go nuts. So it sounds like Armageddon is happening, and they're still trying to talk about each other's roommates, and it's a fine balance there, because we wanted them to embrace all the happy accidents, and that was a medium to not happy accident. And so anyway, that was great, and we ended up ADRing those lines multiple times to make sure that it was just as good as it could be. And I think we got there. Yeah, so we were just talking about the logistics. I think we're going to get a great shot right there of the garage. So that's where the three of us are sitting. So I have a script that sort of has a game plan of basically the shots we want to be on, and who and at what point and how violently and how close. By violent, I mean like how aggressive our pans back and forth are, and when it was important to really be on one or the other. And of course, that's being kind of jazzified and improvised with Aaron, who's out there. And sometimes it's like, ideally, let's try to get to this spot if you can. But we found there was an important rule through our camera tests early on, which was generally you had to have a motivation. Let's just say that the difference between a pan that is motivated by something that an actor does is way more successful and feels natural than the camera guy just moving off of someone for no apparent reason other than like someone off camera told him to move. We obviously didn't invent that, but our evidence bore it out as well. And so a lot of times we would say, like, the next opportunity you have, try to get there. And sometimes we just had to break our own rule. And sometimes it was the spirit of what was said, like the words between the lines was enough motivation to move the camera. I don't know. It's all stuff that we obviously read into very deeply and we're careful about. And hopefully the sum total that you're not even noticing still feels like a successful experience. But we obviously don't expect the audience to be keeping score quite as closely. But we have to try completely. And the other thing we devised was basically a directional map or a compass, which indicated backgrounds. And so what you'd be looking at right now is like 1 o'clock. 12 noon being right down the middle of the two of them, which would generally be looking at the back of Wendy's house.
His skills and trade, those are.
Because I had mentioned like trying to dole out your cards slowly. And one of the biggest assets we had was different backgrounds. And when you first reveal a background, or when you return to a background after not seeing it for a while, and it's changed, or something has changed, it feels new. And if we were to open the movie giving you a solid 360-degree experience of the entire backyard, who's outside, who's not outside, what's hanging up, what's not hanging up, all of that firework goes off at the same time. So instead, we're just trying to light different candles at different times, and you get the aroma of different ones at different times. And so what that referred to in our nomenclature was where Aaron's feet were, or where his, maybe like you'd say his belly button is pointing, would be noon. So right now he's in noon as a position, even though he's kind of looking maybe like more to like 11 o'clock. Obviously, if I didn't say it, the number's on a clock. 12 being north, not even north. 12 being straight on axis, 6 being totally opposite. So we'd be behind the actors looking at the backyard for 6 o'clock. And I used a pen and wrote that on Aaron's wrist before we would shoot each day.
You'd be surprised.
And that'd be sort of his quick hand
I'm not gonna get in the
look
middle of
down.
it. I keep saying
How do I get there? Because basically I would say, like, we've got 4 more lines, and then we're going to try to get to
you guys need to just move on
12 o'clock.
instead of being stuck in this.
And actually, I can tell you right now, we are setting up for invisible cut that had to be done. So watch closely at Wendy. You'll see it jump. If you look at Jordan, you won't.
I'll see.
Um,
I'll try not to ask him, or I'll try not to tell him, and I'll tell
yeah,
him.
so he moves his hands a lot, so you want to look at him. Right there, obviously she popped. So what happened there is we had to remove a neutral density filter at some point in the night so that we could get enough stops of light. From neutral density is basically just sunglasses for your camera. When it's brighter outside, we had to put sunglasses on, and then we'd use a lot of internal things to make sure everything looked balanced. But there's a point where you got to take your sunglasses off and sort of reset all those internal numbers back up to be sensitive, or whatever, to balance it properly. And we just could not. We even tried a variable ND, which is like sunglasses that can change how tinted they are as they go. That looked terrible. Created tint that just was unnecessary. So we did, every time we would film, we found that position where we would have the actors freeze for 5 seconds. They would just literally not move. Aaron would click the button, it would swipe up, it's internal, so it like goes, and then he clicks all these buttons as fast as he can and switches it, and then the actors, no one's telling them anything, then they just continue again. And hopefully no one's moved very much, and I'm able to blend it on good faith in the edit. I think it worked out pretty well there, but that's what happened, and something that had to happen. All those internal clickings that Aaron's doing throughout the process, and we're changing a lot of levels here, so it would be the equivalent of you putting on like the darkest 3 pairs of sunglasses you have all the way up to like nothing, and your pupils being super dilated in these experiences. And he does that twice, once with neutral density on and once without. And so in the edit, in basically the color grade, I'm trying to blend all of those slight changes, which are little spikes of light changing, into invisible, seamless moments. I think generally that worked out pretty well, but just another little technical thing that is getting cleaned up there.
You met someone you like, you want to go see them, but you can't travel, but you decide to do it anyways, so you take the risk and you do it. That's fine, it makes sense. Look, Mom,
So we've been talking about the different positions on the clock. That came
connect with people.
very close to the end. I think we only implemented that as a solution. It might have been after the dress rehearsal, or it was right before the dress rehearsal, and so we were sort of installing it, as you would say in football terms, during the dress rehearsal. But that was a game changer in how we were able to communicate quickly and make sure we were telling the same story. So, yeah, it's a dance, and so I'm instructing from behind Lisa's head there, Aaron in my ear, and then Luke on my side. And with Luke, I'm able to touch him, so I can signal him by like touching his knee, or just pointing at who should be in focus or when to hold. And obviously, these guys are so talented and understand the story enough too that they can make decisions. Great example here of starting to turn up the intensity of close-ups and speed.
Because I only slept with him. Don't tell your father.
So as exciting as it was for the two of them to act that out, and they do so well,
Sex
inside that garage, we are also moving at lightning speed. And I don't know if Luke is needing to pull through all that too, but that's challenging.
I mean, and that's fine, Mom.
Yeah. So in the edit room, that would just be cutting quickly, and then you're sort of holding on slower, quieter things. Pretty basic, but we're doing it
What it is, right? It's totally natural. Don't
on
feel
set
bad about it.
every single time.
Maslow's pyramid, of course.
And look at that. Like, I talked about continuity of performance and like how important
automatically mean that they would make it
when you edit film, especially longer films,
and
I think those editors would agree. Again, as if I know what the hell I'm talking about. But I notice a lot that there are performances that don't always mesh back up. And when the actors were performing them on set, it was perfect because they were reacting and listening and doing the correct instinctual things and creating the right timing for lines to work well. But then in the edit room, like one person's basically talking at an 8 and the other person's more at a 4, and they just aren't syncing up really well. Or from one scene to the next, especially when you're trying to imply real time is passing, like no time has passed for the characters, but the actors are in a different headspace because it's after lunch now. Like, I just was sort of worried about how that would start to feel false or would get us in trouble if we were trying to do that. Like, after lunch now, Mike needs to have this reaction, but we shoot Lisa's coverage 3 hours later. Like, is she going to have the same energy to match and stuff? Now, the advantage of that with most editors, they'll tell you that, well, a lot of times they get more control of the performance there and they can do stuff as we're in the 6 o'clock position, moving to the 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock position. Now you know. And that's all sort of cued. So Sherry has cued John Kehoe perfectly there to be returning with the gas. The family in the background you'll see has been cued to start to be bothered by how loud this conversation is getting and packing up their stuff. Again, things the audience might not know, but one of those beautiful things that plays do so well is the ensemble helps you set the tone of... I just love that about a play, that you can watch the ensemble of Hamilton, or you can watch Hamilton himself, but they all should be telling their own story. And sometimes it impacts the main story, and sometimes it's their own thing. So we wanted to give the same treats in our film play. Now we're back at noon, and you can see even now, halfway through the movie, how different the background looks from when we started. And there was a huge shaft of golden sun, but also deeper shadows because it was darker. But obviously I'm all over the place. But I was talking about the advantage of an editor who takes more control of a performance, because they're elongating the gap in between two lines that an actor didn't give them at the time. And, you know, they both have their pros and cons. The editor heavy version, I don't think is going to be as true and as instinctual feeling as letting the actor set their own pace, and to find those paces in rehearsal, find those emotions in rehearsal instead of doing 6 takes of it and really finding it there. And our safety was that we had 4 days of shooting, so that, like, this is the only time that Mike gave this performance for this part of his reaction to learning about the fact that his mother might already be married. He might have already failed her, quote unquote. And that's how I had felt at the time, of like, I had neglected paying a close enough attention, and my mom might be in a very tough situation as he's now starting to take out on her and do his own investigation of as far as how bad might this be. It's a great moment. It's also has a sadness to it, which is how I had felt at the time, as opposed to continuing to be in sort of the confrontational, angry mode that Jordan is so often in. So that only came out once at its best, and I just want to watch them now. They're so good. No one walks out at this point. You can't leave once this stuff starts happening.
from a month on the phone and a few phony days there.
Don't say
Not just
that.
you personally, Mom, but I'm talking anybody. Like, if I met some girl and we went on a trip and when
If we had it to do over, the 20 minutes prior to this, you might have tried to find an even tighter way to make that a little bit shorter. But every time I think I have the spot that's the most boring, someone at, one of the few screenings we've had will come up to me and say, like, their favorite spot is in that zone. So at this point, it's the world's to choose and make their own choices. But I think it'd be a little more engaging if it was a little tighter. But now you're starting to get all the backgrounds all in one sort of move, and the energy's there from the actors and the camera, and all of that hopefully is combining to giving you a lot of relative stimulation from the relative calm. We're even throwing a little Dutch angle there. This is I think it's the first time in the movie we're doing this. Maybe it's the second callback, but when she really starts to get tangled up in her own head, canting the angle. So hopefully just putting to bed the continuity of performance. I think this is actually a great example of this, of thinking longer term too, right? So, I think it's giving you moments just like that where Lisa's an amazing actor and she could get to these places, but would she always be so flushed in the face? Would she always not have as much oxygen because she's just spoken a whole bunch? And this zone out have as much energy? And same with the cameraman and all of us. And not to mention the fact that the sunset would be different, and one wrinkle of clothing or the bangs might look different. All those little tells that might take you out of it. You don't get any of that if you commit to these really long takes. And then when you're editing, you're using really long strategies. Like what day has the most to offer? I'm going to pause that thought quick and watch the apple tree that's just being revealed now behind her head, right behind her head now in the smoke. You see the apple fell? Talk about a happy accident. She's zoned out. We're focused deep. Nothing is back there. That's not a prop. That's just when that apple decided to fall after growing for an entire year. If it wasn't one take and you weren't able to watch that, I guess someone could be up in that tree dropping an apple, but I feel like more than ever you might believe happy accidents. I got to tell you, the burn barrel too, that's not a propane fire. That's not a smoke effect. There's not a hurricane hazer in there. That is just cardboard and wood and gasoline, and the only person touching that is our on-camera actor, John Kehoe, who, when he passes by it, throws more wood in. And that puppy performed like a champ, creating interest. And those of you who've seen the movie already, hopefully all of you at this point, because it's getting spoiled, will know that coming up it's going to really kick butt, because it just creates flame exactly when it needs to. You can't plan for that, but you can set up a set to allow for that. And you can be reactive as a filmmaking team to embrace it. Again, that's Maria Braun back there, her knees right now, but starting to change the environment, starting to lose color. For one, it's creating variety. For two, it's slowly changing our set, still within the parameters of a natural, realistic world, but starting to become more bleak and less inhabited and less of a idyllic, sunshiny day. And she's there for that awesome "what would the neighbors think" line, or "neighbors keeping track of you" line. So Maria on the film, I mentioned, was sort of the first person to read the Wendy part
Okay.
Actually, in the table read, I read for Wendy, which was one of the most powerful experiences I've
His denomination.
done, writing. I wrote as honestly as I could, my mom's perspective, and then performing it from her point of view. I mean, that's a pretty powerful thing to do if you're ever in an argument, to read a transcript of it from the other person's point of view and trying to make make you, in this case, believe in your agenda.
You don't have to worry about his
If we all had enough time to do that on every issue, we wouldn't have as many issues,
I mean, look
I
at
guess.
the Christians, right?
But
the
Maria
men of God. I mean, look at
is an excellent performer,
I mean, my point
and
is
we, for a while, were having so much trouble casting this that we considered
I'm sorry, but like I'm just speaking facts.
aging
okay?
her
You want
up
me to tell
into,
not doing that.
and I'm not
you know,
saying it is-
in
I'm
retrospect, it
saying-
seems like an obvious,
based off what you're telling me, there is a lot more to find out.
an obvious choice to not do that, to cast someone of the appropriate age. And that was always our initial goal, but we were really striking out.
How is he when he's angry with you?
We had attempted. I mean, it's a weird mix of us being new, independent, not having money, but some people still are able to cast under those conditions. But we also had a pandemic, and
His friends, like people that he's close to.
in that
people that are gonna be
we
around
so
him
we
in the
had
house
sort of submitted this. We made personalized pitch videos to allow maybe like a dozen male actors and a dozen female actors
I'm talking about his character, his integrity, if he's trustworthy.
with quote unquote names and with quote unquote audiences.
Like, even if he means well. Like,
That was the first attempt before we even thought about,
for
we felt like you gotta try that
And once you get to
first
know him, you
and see
realize that he
what
just
happens.
is so desperate for money.
Overall,
And
this
that
project was
can't
also
really- he doesn't
a
plan well, so you
attempt
can't
by
really
our
count on
team
him.
to start to learn how do we tackle a bigger project. So even things we maybe didn't have a lot of hope in, we wanted to do the process just so that we understood.
One of his close
And we
friends.
gave it our best effort.
That is something that his close friends might tell you.
We had some interesting conversations
Or his neighbors,
with
right?
along the way, sometimes with agents, sometimes we talked to a Nickelodeon star who had grown up
Or small communities.
and was now
know
in his
people's characters
20s,
through close proximity.
who expressed interest.
Know every
I don't
single
know, it
house
didn't end up
in
feeling
the
like a
area,
great
every
fit.
car that's in the driveway. Like, it's
And
just
if there was
easy
one
to
person
get,
to
it would behoove you down
cast as more of a name, it would have been the mother, the titular role. And sort of at the same time, we need to also say that we weren't finding great local options either. And then we found Mike, and then we found Lisa. And would never, even if celebrities came to us now, I mean, it might be a different experience to do it, and certainly it would mean more people would watch our movie, which is so sad that that's how it works, but it is how it works. It's also how I consume movies too. Like, it's just we're all sort of playing by the same rules.
you learn the most by talking to them. Have you done
That being said, like, I am so proud of this movie and the performances. I wouldn't really want to do it again, except maybe if that were to happen, I'd be interested in like watching their interpretation of it. But I feel like this got to be exactly what it was supposed to be.
Mom, he's divorcing next
And
week. Otherwise, you're gonna be down there without rent
I
money
hope
for day one.
they, as actors, don't feel any self-consciousness that they're not famous enough. Because to me, that doesn't matter. It's a societal societal thing, and it's not like they're the second choice. I am. I feel like this is actually one of the better examples of it too. How committed they are and good, and I think they both have as many rights as anybody else to become those names. And this is the first feature film that Lisa's been a part of, and also Mike, and also basically everyone on our team too. So, and I actually really like that, and that we're all kind of on the same boat, working for the same goals. And I hope it's the beginning of the
one before that.
of the rest of the career that they want to have. I mean, Lisa's already an extremely accomplished actress and has had a very excellent career. I mean, I don't want to speak for her, but at least from the outside, seems to have an excellent career in the theatrical world.
This is actually the one who was with
She's done several two-handers in theater, and that's actually how we ended up getting in touch with her and finding her name. Was one of her acting partners makes an appearance in the beginning as the plumber in Heritage Village. That's John Profeta, who is also an amazing actor we've done several short films with. Finally got us in touch with Lisa, and the rest is history.
Or like their crushes, and then the honeymoon, and then storm. The facades come down, they have their first fight, and then there's no spark, and they're not compatible. Like, it's fine, it's just middle school or college, it's flames. But he's actually marrying them, so instead of breaking
remember
up
this so
without
clearly.
marriage, he has to get a divorce. Like,
Just how ironic it felt at the time that
he says it's like they're not even married.
exactly, Mom. Mom, that's why people date. And people move in with each other before they
just
commit
that
their
it felt
entire
like I
existence
was,
to one another. They
if
do
there's
it
one thing to say about
before
this
the
day, it
law,
was that
before everything.
my reactions to her information was digging into lectures that she had given me, not to like rub it in her face, but like my only training,
No, how many
it
people
felt
I
like
dated?
on these
Who have
subjects
I slept with? How many
were like when
marriages?
I was
That I know of.
uh,
Talk to me.
I would tell you if I got fucking married.
yeah.
God, you can be sure of that. That's a big fucking
I am
deal.
not gonna sit here.
Just let this
and
play
you
out. This
talk.
is
And I'm
just great.
supposed to just let
We have
you
a hidden
sit
cut
here
right there.
and cast judgment on me?
You are so rude to me.
You fixate on swear words and premarital sex is the only two sins that matter, and fuck's not even blasphemy.
Well, it's not something an only child should say to his mother. The Bible says, honor thy father and mother.
Well, it also says to train up a child in the way he
I-
should go. Remember?
I had two things I could say there, but Lisa used to joke at that line, like that it's particularly bad if it's an only child who says it. So, Mike,
Had
when you talk about casting,
so
you want
religious.
people who are naturally,
School shit. That I was as good as
who
you,
naturally
so
have like sort of the eminence,
I took it more
or
seriously. Eternal.
don't laugh at me if I say aroma of the person that they're supposed to be playing. And
I had
I think
almost all of
Mike
my
and I
friends
share a lot of similarities,
because I wouldn't
um,
do stuff.
and it's a natural fit, like in the sense of like he's had those types of conversations before, and with a few sort of tweaks of how I use language versus how he might normally use language, as when he's talking as Mike, and just like how he sort of internalizes that. But I mean, he's connecting with a lot of just normal, natural things inside of him for this role. And Lisa brings a ton of the right like aroma that I talked about, but she's certainly not she's not normally dealing with the situation exactly that my mom is dealing with. Although there might be similarities that I'm sure she's definitely checking into things. She's also, I think, so accomplished
I'm sorry
with
too, Mom.
performance, and we didn't necessarily get into a lot of where she's dipping into the wells of emotions, but she certainly believes what she's saying. But I guess I'm just trying to say it's a little different than like casting someone who's exactly where my mom was at that place. You know, I think Lisa would tell you she's generally
A
more
different counselor and
uh,
a friend as soon as they disagreed with you, Mom.
on the other side of it, more like in the Jordan point of view of this conversation with other people. But you wouldn't know it.
You listen
I
to
think
Grandma Shirley more than anyone else, Mom.
I saw a huge change in her when I was able to find a voicemail that my mother had left, and she's hitting a lot of the same themes that the script that we had been reading for 3 weeks has verbatim, like, you know, and she had, it just was so real to hear my mom saying those things, and I think it helped
She told me to get away from
establish for Lisa the same thing that Mike was getting every single day, which was being close to me and having firsthand access to how I deliver things and what I was thinking at the time.
And we were
Um,
together. Okay.
And just, yeah,
He helped me.
the drinking game of this would be how many times I say real. You have to take a shot, but he knows that I'm real. And
First time, and he
for Lisa to have a moment where she's able to hear that,
very strange,
uh,
honey.
I think brought it into a new context and was great. I don't know, like I can't say that it was a watershed
Got back into the Bible.
in how anything was delivered, but it felt like in an internal way, it was a very powerful way to ground us in something. After our first day of shooting, so days 2 through 4, I played that as the last thing we listened to before starting.
We didn't sleep.
You can imagine the rush that us 10 or less crew members have in trying to get everything in place before the 7:03, 7:10. It was always timed based on where the sun was going to be at like 9:30, because we were always working backwards from true darkness, and it would change every day and every week. So there's a huge rush to get the house that does not normally look like a mess, does not normally have a table where it is, doesn't normally have furniture the way it is, and the backyard needs to be dressed every day. And we kind of have from, I don't know, basically like an hour and a half. And we got down to a speed where we could flip over the house in like 20 minutes. And we had time to spare, which was awesome by the end. But there's just a lot of coordination and people showing up, and sort of like a field trip meets a construction site. It's something that my newness as a director sort of was just so scatterbrained and trying to make sure that we could go on time and people had what they needed for the rest of the 2 hours. The first time I hadn't finished by setting the environment really well for the actors.
I slept with him.
And so I made a deliberate choice after that to make sure that the final focus is getting the headspace right. Like that's maybe the one most important job that the director should have. And
I'd be okay.
at the same time, we're wearing, okay, hidden cut right here, right there. Just had to cut that off. That to me is the boldest invisible cut one can make. I tried so hard to think of ways to get around it, but just it was irresistible. Performances were strong and matched. That's also a level to credit that Lisa is almost in the exact same emotional state between the two. I said all that stuff about continuity and stuff. Did it really matter? The answer is yes, it does matter, because her performance this time is still being informed by a half hour, 45 minutes of what came before it. She just did it on multiple days. So she gets to this similar spot each time when she gets to 1:33. But I had to do the cut there to bridge us between days. There might have been a lot of factors. I don't remember how long this take ends up going, but for whatever reason, that was the time I had to do it. And it just felt so crazy to be looking right at her face. But I get by. One of the reasons being right there, you see the smoke goes away. That's because fire is happening inside that barrel. If I was watching that at home, I would say, oh, well, they turned on the propane. That was easy. But we didn't. Such a good shot. And I think, whatever. And that's not credit to me. That's the whole thing. But I just love that in a two-hander where you think we've seen everything, we can still pull off a really bold shot that sort of, we would call this, our shorthand for this was trapping. I think it's officially called like shorting or short framing or something, but trapping was easier for us to understand and say quickly. And then we're going to add a little bit of Dutch at the very end, but I just love it. She's recalling her darkest, or really embracing the shadow side of her face and giving her no room to breathe. And she's, to bring it to real life, I mean, it's transformational the first time someone tells you that they've tried to kill themselves. And I've had that experience a few times in my life, and especially the first time you hear it, it's exactly what I still feel when I hear this music. I mean, it's...
She said I had to get out of here. She had Dad.
You get washed over with that feeling. I mean, it's... That edited cue was a mistake at first, or just an accident. I just dropped in the songs to see which one I might want to use there, and it just dropped, and I hadn't equalized it or balanced it, so it just overpowered everything. And goodness gracious, okay, leave it, move on, because to me that's exactly what Jordan's feeling. And it's a nice I don't know, echo or mirror or reflection of the
I don't know why.
The thing we established, the sort of zoning out or disassociation. To me at the time, you just go over, you set a new timeline in your head from whenever that moment was that they said that to when they said like, oh, at this point I had actually tried this, and you kind of replay, let's say it was a month or 5 months in between, all the interactions you've had, or all of life that has passed, and like in the alternative universe, how that would be different. Yep. Well, that's the stuff that we were dealing with. I feel like I haven't talked a lot on this commentary about the soul-searching aspect of the film. It's been very filmmaker heavy, and I feel like both could be talked about for 2 hours easily.
We talked about it, and he was scared. Okay, but he is repentant. The Bible is full of repentance and forgiveness.
I'm not exactly sure what to say. that sort of the movie doesn't say without by existing. I guess as far as my commentary or my my analysis of what the day was like or what I'm seeing, I think that's all depicted. I spent 2 years trying to make sure that was clear. We have a hidden cut coming right here. Whoop.
Forgiving him does not qualify someone to be a good husband, Mom.
Just to get this out of the way, I think we have like 20 some hidden cuts, which are all sort of jumping. There's 4 parallel tracks. Then the train leaves the station, goes on the same exact journey on 4 different tracks, and we just jump from one track to the other. But the train theoretically has the same speed, theoretically has similar framing, similar lighting, but it's all just similar because they're slightly different places. And so, and then all I'm doing is sewing together 2 shots, basically. It works really well when you're panning. Like that one didn't have a cut, but I don't think you'd notice the difference because
it's not about the money.
the eye, when it's moving and a little bit blurry, and and you're just you're not necessarily looking for it. Now that I've spoiled it all, you know, I think it'll be easy to see them,
I know, and you have back problems.
but that's not the point. The point is
hearing loss, and you can't drive, or you
to
can't
make the
travel.
audience feel
Nobody
like
has more
they're
problems than you, Mom.
sitting outside with these two, and the only way that they're going to get out of this conversation is to end it themselves. The filmmaker isn't going to just cut ahead, and it's not going to try to explain what happened in the 10 minutes that you weren't looking at the two of them. But yeah, I mean, one of the most obvious things that people are,
How bad it was what he did. God, I was so.
I think I stopped to see where we're at. We are going to do the ambulance here. That was genuine. And that is also a cut, bringing us to that. But the light did turn on there. It's just a coincidence that they kind of happen at the same time. So, and I'd mentioned like quote unquote hiding lights. I mean, we put the Christmas lights in the back right there, and the light up now above Lisa is replaced by a cinematic light. And then there's like a stair tube, sort of trying to imply a mosquito light on the garage over the junk pile. I don't know if it totally reads as that, but it creates a little bit of. Everybody asks about my mom. Such an obvious thing. I should have mentioned that earlier, probably, but so she was. We did the table read, and then I called her and just started talking about this, and I was considering it. I wanted to check in with her first, and I mean, to cut to the bottom line, she gave her blessing and also requested to not be exposed to the script or the movie, if possible, because it's a traumatic time in her life. Not just this conversation, but it almost goes without saying as you're watching it that it's not a period people want to visit, and she's moved past it or put it into a certain box. So, and also I will add, doing much better in 2022. I mean, it's January of 2022, but in the last few months, she's shown signs of being much, much better. And mental health is not just a sickness you recover from in a couple days. It's not a bone that heals. It's certainly not just taking the Band-Aid off or anything. It's usually, at least in my experience, and from who I've seen, it's a dynamic thing that's changing within them. It's changing within the context, and it's being treated in a fluid way, generally, almost trying things out, taking things away, trying to create some level of empirical, is this better or worse, as they're sort of finding diagnoses and what's going to be the best blend. And in this moment with these two, Jordan is concerned that either medicines are changing and that's impacting her, or the context and the mental health is changing and that's causing this, or the medications aren't being used in the, whatever, the structure that they would be most effective. I just feel like it's still a messy thing. And it relies on a lot of variables that are always in flux. So, I don't know. There's a whole conversation that could be begun of like, how much should Jordan be pushing? There's a lot of schools of thought, Does she just need someone to listen, or does she need
Instead of working minimum
does she need
40 hours
tough
a
love?
week, shooting weddings for 14 hours on Saturdays. And then
One of the biggest things is
all of that,
we know that
my actual
she
goal,
needs, other people, like all people, and Jordan needs it too.
which is me, without doing any
And
work, and I still have enough money to pay for my bike, clothes, food, and savings for a security deposit.
and I think that was part of my mom's recovery as well.
25.
Was sort of starting to,
Where did 4 years after college go?
she always had people, but continuing to use them,
To show.
continuing to get new people, getting
Four
distance
times
from
that each month you're complaining for more.
things.
In a free house.
I don't know what's more interesting to listen to, me talking a mile a minute about filmmaking, or me
That there are worse
not knowing what to talk about in relation to this subject. I mean, as it pertains to the movie, yeah, she
Sorry.
wasn't, no one is thrilled that
No, Mom.
one of the maybe darker times of their life is going to be portrayed for other people to see. But on the other hand, she had a lot of respect for and clarity, knowing that it might be able to do a lot of good to help other people get through their dark times, or recognize how it can support people. And I'm very, very proud to say that the movie is doing that. In the few screenings that we have had, there's been some very, it's not for everybody, but almost maybe a third of the audience will try to find us and have a very sobering talk about
I don't even know what another setback
just sort of identifying themselves or their loved ones.
medication.
Even people in Gary who overheard the filming of it. So from even the time that we were
Group home.
laying this on film for the first time, we were pulled aside, and
50 something.
some, same thing. A third of some people really advocated for hoping the film does well and can find
And then if
the people that
this guy didn't send you
should
enough
see it, or to feel like they're not alone, or that they're being represented. It's not trying to be a end all be all of anything, but when I wrote this, and especially when I was sitting in that chair,
What's best for me.
I did not have a sophisticated understanding of mental health.
Mom.
Definitely not as much as I've now had, as I've tried to get my feet wet in making a film about it, quote unquote about it. I don't think it's about mental health. It's about my mom and me. But it's exactly what
You have to slow down.
what you see and what I needed. Insanity felt like it was American Psycho. It was
I'm swearing to make
the
a point, Mom.
Shutter Island.
It's
These,
worse to see that you're making someone
extreme
upset.
and violent cases.
Okay, I have
There's so
anxiety
many
attacks.
examples in film of
Have people yelling at me.
you don't know what you don't know.
Okay, this is worse than the warnings
I
you gave me
last
time.
certainly didn't know what was out there, and I hope at the very least that this shows that,
Jordan, huh?
for one, it's
I can't
not always a sensational, violent
lose you.
mass.
I already feel like I have
Like,
to force you to.
20% of people or more are experiencing
All of this
some sort of
is
mental health
forcing
condition,
both of you.
and
To
it's
support
very
me.
much underrepresented. I think only 2% of it is represented on characters and movie characters that we see. And when they do, like, half of them are perpetrators of violence, which is a stat I found far after I was trying to figure out where this fit in the landscape of cinema. But in the landscape of real life, this is happening in one of 4 houses. Or a household with 4 people, it's probably happening with one of them, and to some extent. And the biggest thing that we all know is that we're not alone, and that it is certainly okay to go through this stuff. Homes are puzzles, and they are broken ornaments. They don't always look like the perfect picture view. They don't always look like it seems like your neighbors do. Something Sherry Light said, which is one of my favorite quotes ever, is that we all struggle and that it's okay. You have permission to do what is happening, especially if you can break through it, whether it's in the moment or in the future, to get help or to offer help. But we don't need to beat ourselves up for having storms in our life. So right now we're in day 1 of filming, believe it or not. We jumped in pretty early on. Once it started getting dark and the light came on, we went all the way back to our very first day shooting this. And not only were the performances really good and sort of especially dark, and it was the darkest lighting that we ever experienced in the 4 days. For one, I think because we maybe started like 5 or 10 minutes after we were supposed to. Look at that flash of color. Call back to the dog. This obviously all really happened. It all did. I don't need to mention it, but it's not an extra flourish. But this rain, this sprinkly rain, was real and was happening at the end of day 1. And once it gets backlit, it looks especially suited. All real weather, which I like in the sense of if it's Hollywood needs a rainstorm, it's the machines, and they don't always have a flag blowing sideways. And I don't know. I just like things feeling. That blood gets put on by Maria as Mike is acting, giving you that scary look. She's putting blood on his ankle, on the ground, and Aaron actually stepped on her on accident, not knowing early on that she was going to be down there doing that. And the show goes on, unfortunately. We also lose signal on the autofocus, so now Aaron is trying to do everything at the same time, telling a story and all this. Anyway, so the darkest of the dark, and so to give some level of this is the most theatrical or enhanced things are going to get, and it really, so these the lights and the sound design are all us. We had high-powered flashlights in 3 different cars. All the extras who we pulled away become people in cars, shining really bright lights as they drive by at us to create moving shadows and energy. And it allows me to add these real sound effects of there's a good one, you know. But there it is. The natural rain decides to turn itself off. I mean, it's just crazy. Yeah, it was the right tone for me as far as you know, it like letting things be a reality and still trying to give the audience the story and the feelings that needed to happen. And you know, spiritually, that's what it feels like. That's also being that close to Route 60 and semis going by can feel like that. So happy to do that. This lighting, before we get on other subjects, is a projector showing different clips as if motivated by a TV in the house. But I love the effect it has as our kind of final setup, our lighting scheme, creating a little color and variation of color on their faces as it travels. And
Broke through whatever's going on in there.
and so
So much medication.
don't need to say it, but like this is how it resolved naturally on the day. And
All the more reason to do whatever you can, Mom. Like, tattoo
you
can be
notice the
important,
pivot
but
there.
You need help from someone real.
You know,
right?
they
Someone long-term.
in there is a breakthrough and there is a change.
He's my best friend.
And once Jordan goes from being her enemy and defensive and her needing to have walls up
And I
and to
know
justify
Greg Wagner's
things
there, so
to
some of the stuff he says with some caution, but he's
someone
also
who
really
admits his
smart, and he's known you
his
since
need for her and that he
16,
loves her and doesn't want to lose her, but to such a degree that she calls his bluff, says, well, I'll never see you again. And she says, fine.
can be a pain in the butt.
And then he says, well, I don't really want that.
I don't know what
And that,
I am
and then
really
breaking down and showing vulnerability is what ends up allowing her to, I think, access a different channel in her mind of being a supportive and wanting to protect and or feeling loved and valued. And isn't that what we all need all the time? You know, most arguments with whoever, whether they're dealing with a lot of complex things or just normal feelings, it usually does come down to wanting to either get revenge on some scorn that you feel has happened to you. Until that is justified, you kind of keep your arms crossed. And if anyone is able to just cut to the chase and say that they love you and
everything
they're sorry, it would end it. But it's sometimes you got to go through the whole ringer to get to that spot in an argument. And sometimes, in this case, the biggest one I've experienced, or one of the biggest arguments I had experienced, not even argument, discussions with high stakes, you know, everything was just amplified.
now or whatever.
But this is the central core of the whole
Sure,
movie.
I'm sick. I have a degree of disability, but I don't know. Maybe that's what having a kid is.
What?
Is this. Like all of this today. Right? You're storing information instead of soup in bottles of water. It's your own lectures for when you've lost access.
Well, I guess you should keep that insight.
Yeah,
As a lesson for your own kids.
that we said that at the time, but I also I want that to be important.
Kids.
It's not that Jordan saved her. He ended up being a conduit, in my opinion, to her own understanding, to her own philosophies and viewpoints. I mean, I remember so clearly the lectures because I was on the other side of that conversation so many times, thinking I was in love and needed to talk on the phone all the time to my girlfriends in middle school and high school and college and all this stuff. And having someone on the outside sort of bringing me down and giving me context and using a lot of the examples that Jordan gives back word for word. If we were doing a final tally of keeping score, I think my mom deserves credit for fixing herself more than Jordan deserves credit for getting through this conversation. And I think it's because she had established
thing in my whole life.
a roadmap, a rule set, and then in a strong enough way that it was able to be read back to her at some point. I might be reading into it more than it should be. I'll alert you one more hidden cut is coming. See if you can find it.
Gave me a lot to think about.
Oh, and we've now finished it wherever. Hopefully you saw it, if you want to see it. So yeah.
You know, I can come over soon, Mom. We could talk again, or we could just watch Lord of the
It's
Rings.
not supposed to be a movie about Jordan fixing mental health, because that doesn't happen.
Tell Damon I said
It's a story of two people talking and going through stuff, and there being a lot riding on it and a lot happening all at once. and a lot of emotions. And at the end of it, them being able to put a pin in it, to have some compromising truths of like, in this case,
Now maybe you
talk to the people you trust, slow down,
Happy Mother's Day, Mom.
think before you leap if possible, and
Same to you.
let me try to be here for you as well. And then this little sort of half joke line too of like, hopefully sometimes we can just watch Lord of the Rings. We can just hang out. And that's okay too. And I think that is really important in relationships as well. That
Bye.
Bye. Thank
I don't
you.
know. I don't know. You don't always. Sometimes you need to just play, and calling back to the childhood kid learning to ride his bike in this driveway, now on a motorcycle as an adult, roles reverse a little bit, and that is okay for roles to reverse, if not the entire point. There was also a hidden cut in there. I don't know if you could tell. Yeah, by that point, we felt like we had earned a hidden cut to get us on the drone, so we weren't quite as worried about hiding it. This is our backup of a backup drone. Unfortunately, the one that might have been less grainy wasn't able to be used. So that's it, man. That's Mother's Day. I want to thank you so much for, if you're here, I owe you a huge amount of gratitude because you're helping me feel like it matters, what I've worked on for a very long time. Whether you're just someone on the team watching this, or you're someone at home, or someone in the far future, it was a goal as an artist and as a struggling artist, like all artists are at the beginning. I've said it several times, but I feel like we are in one of those periods that is the most tenuous, and we often kind of overlook this stage, I think, as a society. But it's kind of you can get enough energy to kind of make your first project because you've got your kind of whole life setting you up for that and a lot of favors and stuff. And there's a very important level of sustainability that needs to happen shortly thereafter, as soon as possible, when things will be kind of tight, to do the second or third project. Or this probably would be true too if one were to have done a project that had high expectations that fell below them. But it seems like there's a point where in one's life, you get established enough that you'll be okay. You have a certain safety net creatively. Part of this journey from Jordan into Travis has been creating safety nets in other aspects of my life so that I won't put myself in danger to make a film project and to invest basically all the money up front to do it. And if everything was a total failure, I would have just made that an investment. And that was okay and part of the process. But anyway, I appreciate the fact that you are here, and that gives us one more level of hope that maybe this experiment can continue and we can continue to try to push things. And hopefully that's all in service of you at the end of the day, to create something of value. The credits on this film are different than credits on other films. All the time, credit refers to a gulf of sacrifice that people have put in. This film in particular, most of those people are doing it by volunteering or taking leaps of faith, but fully expecting to not make money, not fair value. The potential value comes from people like you supporting it and appreciating it, and a potential trickle of income. But this group of people are special in that this isn't just a job. It's a passion project, and hopefully that has come through in everything. And I guess I'll just see you right here through the end, because we just have the logo. It goes without saying, like, word of mouth is the only way this really is going to move around. So if you liked it, feel free to share and pass it along. I don't just mean that in the YouTube influencer sense, but just tell people. Our website's panamericanfilms.com. Stuff's always there. And it's also a great way to get in touch with me or our team. You're part of the commentary club now, so hopefully it helped you. See you next time, and you take good care of yourself, okay? Bye. Hello again. I'm Travis, the writer and director of Mother's Day. We get a lot of questions about how we made this project. As a one-shot film, a continuous shot film, we did a 2-mile drone shot. If you are interested in any of the filmmaking or our approach to the writing or casting, we created a documentary that shows all of that, and we are also releasing that for free on YouTube. So follow the links in the description to go right over there and learn all about how we made it, the highs and lows during a pandemic. And then the last thing I wanted to say is this movie was made by a group of volunteers. This was not a Hollywood budget, and we do not have a Hollywood marketing budget. As you can see, we're giving it away with a little help from Rural Minds because we think the conversation's important. But you are literally the only way that people are going to discover this. So if you like what you saw or you want to pass this along to anybody, please feel free to share it, spread the word. And if you feel so inclined to give a donation to the team that did this by themselves for over 2 years, you can go over to panamericanfilms.com. Usually only about 1% of the people who see messages like this will actually go and donate. But we would really appreciate you specifically. If you would be the one who takes action, we would really help to compensate the crew and the cast who worked over 2 years of their life to bring this to life for you for free. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart and from Pan American Films and from the hundreds of thousands of families that deal with this every day. Thank you.